Hello, I'm your host, Effie Pilarinu, and today we have a very popular guest who is the founder of the newsletter Popular Fintech, a true banker, and I'm going to try and not butcher his name, Jevgenijs Kazanins. Jevgenis, please pardon if I'm not pronouncing your name right, and welcome to the show.
Hello, Effie, and thanks a lot for inviting me. And I mean, you did an amazing job with the name.
So for my audience, you have founded this newsletter that's called Popular Fintech. You have a focus on publicly traded fintech. You have found a niche there, and you instigate a lot of discussions around these topics. So tell us a bit how this passion came about, and maybe what companies, because obviously there's tons of fintechs. What is fintech? Which kind of companies you cover?
Yeah, sure. So Popular Fintech is a newsletter about publicly traded fintech companies, right? At least this is what I started with. This is what I wanted to write about. I started in late 2020, and if you remember those days, there was like an IPO or a couple each day. So many fintech companies finally went public, and I think kind of what made me start the newsletter is that for me writing is learning first and foremost. So I decided, okay, I'm super curious about these companies. That we finally have lots of data about them. We have all the financial statements, and we have the commentary on the earnings calls, and have different analyst opinions. So I just started reading about that, and at some point I said, okay, why not try to share what they learned?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So are these the companies that you typically talk about? Are they mainly, incumbents that have gone through digital transformation, thinking, Visa and MasterCard and American Express and PayPal, or you're focused also on what I would call fintech native companies like Block, like SoFi? Those are fintech born companies. Or you don't think of it like that?
No, it's a great question, right? I spent maybe too much thinking what is a fintech company nowadays. So just for the background, I entered financial services industry at the golden age of peer-to-peer lending. So like
Okay.
before Lending Club became a public company, and SoFi was in that group, Prosper, Zopa in the UK. Essentially, if you remember those days, those were really the golden age for fintech. I mean, I think this is when the term actually was formulated or broadly accepted. At least when I started, we didn't operate with the term fintech. But if you look at them now, they're all banks. I mean, Lending Club is a bank, SoFi is a bank. I mean, Zopa in the UK is a bank. So kind of where do you draw the line? Why the original fintech like Capital One is not a fintech, but SoFi, which is kind of a bank now, is still a fintech. So, but back to your question, I started writing about companies that seem to me like obviously fintech. So Block, PayPal, I still consider them as a fintech. I mean, one of the earliest. Market, Affirm, right? Probably companies where you wouldn't doubt if they are fintech or not. But then as I started writing, I realized that, probably you cannot look at these companies in vacuum, right? At least if you're writing about payment companies, you have to understand Visa and MasterCard.
Yep.
Right. And from a professional background, I was responsible for issuing and acquiring products. So I understood how the networks work, what are the financial incentives. But in writing, I started to look into how they actually impact or interact with the companies. Especially, there was like a notion that BNPL companies will create their own networks and they'll disrupt Visa and MasterCard. Then I started looking further, right? And I realized that, kind of established players, I don't want to call them legacy. I think it's a bit offensive, like Fiserv and Global Payments and FIS are still players, right? If you look at
Yeah.
FIS, 40% of US regional banks run on their cores, right? So you cannot kind of dismiss them. And Fiserv owns Clover, which grows faster than Square. So I expanded there, but then kind of my curiosity went even further. And I realized that, you probably cannot write about established or new fintech companies without understanding what the big banks do. After all, JP Morgan processes more merchant payments than Adyen and Stripe combined. So probably you or me, when writing about fintech companies, I have to understand what at least the big banks do, and how they come together.
I remember recently in one of your posts looking at the FIS reporting, you highlighted a breakdown from their financial statements of where their revenues and growth is coming from. And the breakdown, if I remember correctly, was looking at money at rest, money in motion, and money at work. And I think the biggest percentage it was from the money in motion rather than the money at rest and the money at work. Do you think in this breakdown, when you look at other financial services companies that you look at, because I think it's time that we just talk about financial services and not, bank or fintech.
Exactly.
And so on. Is that a helpful way? Is it reflective of what's happening? How do you think of that?
Yeah, I think you spotted a very good point. But we should, when talking about Fiserv, we should not forget that they have just sold the majority stake in WorldPay, which is one of the biggest acquirers, right? So they're not the majority holder. That's why they don't consolidate into financial. That's why you kind of don't see the WorldPay numbers in these percentages. If WorldPay was still there, then money in motion, which is primarily payments, right, either on acquiring or on the issuing side, would be much bigger than everything else they have. And I think then it would be very representative of the industry, right? If you look at the financial services space, I mean, I'm not talking about the kind of maybe the revenue or the profits, which are sometimes harder, but purely in terms of the competition, right? I mean, like if you look at the list of payment companies, you have quite a long list, right? Payments for that, like we have processors, online, offline. We have specialized payment companies like Toast and Lightspeed and Shift4, and we have juggernauts like Fiserv and WorldPay. So this is all money in motion, right? It's essentially payments, processing merchant payments, processing issuer payments. There's a lengthy list, and the competition goes to the previous century. What they meant by money at rest was primarily software, right? So FIS is a big player in core banking systems, and there you really have fewer companies, or at least fewer companies that attempting this space, right? And the bigger market share is still concentrated with what would say established or legacy players, right? I mean, it's still FIS, it's still Fiserv, it's still Jack Henry. There are a few attempts, but somehow kind of this purely software play, when you kind of get into the infrastructure of banks is it's very difficult to penetrate for newcomers. I think it's very much related to the sales cycle and sales cycle of like in banking is like what 3 to 5 years, which is absolutely incompatible with VC model. And then what they kind of talk about money at work is like capital markets, investment brokerages, right? And if you look at the US market, then we have like Schwab on the retail side, right? So Robinhood, which might kind of be comparable in number of clients, but incomparable in the assets. And then if kind of a few other players, and then lots of companies that have long history that work with institutional companies and institutional investors, which fintech companies don't even dare to kind of attempt to go after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's so much to be done in the payment sector. I mean, I never forget a report that JP Morgan put out, the payments are eating the world. And I go back to that report because I think it was a brilliant one, outlining why this is the case. And there's so much still to be done and to be solved, because we are running on old infrastructure. So there's more needed to make things frictionless. And then we create other problems. And then we have, all the cross-border stuff. And now we have all the cybersecurity issues of digital. And it's just the never-ending process, right?
Yeah. And if we look in fintech, right, I think payments or acquiring is kind of a door opener for everything else. So if you look at Square, if you look at Toast, yes, they started by offering, payment acceptance services. They give a terminal or a POS system and would process payments for the merchants. But over time they realized, they see the whole cash flow of the merchant. They get all the money in, or most of the money in. So why not start lending, right? Why not help them with payroll and so on and so on. So I think kind of by winning the right to process payments, fintech companies earn the right to offer more.
Yeah, and create a whole
right.
ecosystem around that, whether you do it in-house or through
Exactly.
operations, whether it's blocked with their merchant system. They started with the dongle, right? And look at what they've done, and so many other examples.
Exactly, and the same kind of, if you talk about retail customers, it somehow always comes down to an account, right? If you have an account, if you get salary to this account, then there's so much we can offer you, right? Because we have a contact with you, we have a relationship with you, we see how you earn the money, how you spend the money, how we can offer you a card, personal loan, a mortgage down the line, right? So I think kind of it turned out that, or at least it is how it's playing out, that in consumer space, it's account and getting the seller into this account is something that you can build upon, and then in payments, it's the terminal or the gateway system that you can build around.
Let me ask you something. You've been writing since 2021, right? We are 3 years down the road, right? What is the most controversial topic that you've written about? Let's not go back 3 years. Recently, and when I say recently, maybe the past year, 12 months.
Yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, and maybe it's your view on PayPal. I don't know. What's the more controversial topic you think you've written about?
Yeah, I think if I would kind of judge by the feedback that I received, then it was certainly a PayPal. And again, my thesis is that PayPal might not be done. There's still a major player in the space. Customers are not leaving. They might not be growing as fast as other players in the space, but I think they still have time to turn things around. And PayPal is somewhat very polarizing company, right? Something that it's a legacy player that is being disrupted, and other things that it's like everybody's wrong, and it's just heavily undervalued and has huge potential. So I think why it got so attention is because it's the views are so polarized, at least
Is
in
it
the social
that,
media.
or is it a combination also of the PayPal mafia, Elon Musk, Twitter trying to, or X aiming to become a super app? All that also plays a role, right?
No, certainly, right? I mean, if I think the most reasonable bear thesis, right, around PayPal is that it's death by thousand cuts. So it's not that there would be kind of one big competitor that will take away their business, but there'll be many hundreds of smaller companies that will take smaller pieces. And probably a good example is like Shop Pay and Cash App Pay and all the wallets, or checkout accelerators, as they're sometimes called. And if you look at it, it's really true, right? I mean, like they might not be taking the existing clients of PayPal, but they're definitely taking away the growth, right? I mean, PayPal is growing as kind of as the market, right? I mean, they kind of so far they've been just dragging along, right? Well, if you look at what Shopify is doing with Shop Pay, it's just tremendous growth that they see there, right? But another company that's probably in the same category is Block.
Okay.
Right? Everybody's talking about Cash App, and somehow I think many people give up on Square. Right? I recently wrote that Morgan Stanley published a quite painful chart, and they compared Square with Toast and Shift4, and even like companies like Global Payments. All of them are growing like faster than Square, right? So we probably could look at PayPal and Square as kind of maybe the first generation of challengers, and that kind of became big and maybe also bloated a bit, and have their own conflicts in the organization, and maybe kind of lost this intensity and speed, and then smaller companies started picking up, on their opportunities. So PayPal is just maybe been a bit longer around. It's a bigger company than even Block, but I think what you see is actually very, you see that also in Block, right? So I think the jury is out there if Block and or specifically Square and PayPal can reignite the growth, or they would rather kind of get to the group of iServe and Global Payments and the same FIS, right, where we're talking growth in single digits.
Yeah. I mean, Square is I remember thinking of them a couple of years ago as a potential fintech to really become a more of a universal bank because of its dual ecosystem, because of the visionary moves around the Bitcoin and blockchain. And I think that Cathie Wood also had that as a bet. I haven't checked lately what her holdings reflect, although because it's an active management, it varies, but I know that it is a core part of their portfolio. And I mean, the fact, of course, that they are only US centric, right? They're not global, plays a major role if you compare it to, the PayPals of the world.
True. It's again a Block held Investor Day in 2022, and I was watching it. I actually watched it a couple of times, so it was like a 5-hour event. And back then they spoke about kind of world domination of Cash App, and that sounded a bit kind of ridiculous, Yes, this is an amazing story in the US, right? And it is for some reason only a US phenomenon, right? Even in the UK, they're struggling, and over time this kind of played out. So they kind of left continental Europe, and still hanging out in the UK. I think when it comes to Square, opportunity in Europe in integrated payments is still big. I think many companies are betting on that, right? If you look, probably this and a few more years ahead will be about, US companies coming to Europe and making waves here. So, I mean, Toast is here, Shift4 is here, Block has been here, but I believe they'll become even more active. There are local competitors, but still, kind of, I think we're yet to go through this wave of integrated payments. So when it comes to Block, I think kind of Cash App is US phenomenon. It's for me as a shareholder, a tiny shareholder. It kind of, it was great to see that they decided to focus on the US. But I think I'm buying into the thesis that Square could be bigger than just a US company.
Yeah, that's we shall see. Any surprises in the public markets in this year in 2024 in the fintech sector, either to the negative or the positive? Is there anything that struck you this year?
So, with the public markets, in retrospective, everything seems very logical.
Yes, of course.
So, so if we kind of
except for Nvidia, right? Which
except for Nvidia. Okay, yes, Nvidia. Yeah, Nvidia still, even in retrospective, probably doesn't is a very tricky bet. So if you think of 2023, everybody was confident that there'll be a huge recession, in Europe and the US, and that didn't happen. And then entering this year, everybody was super confident that the Fed will start cutting rates, as soon as spring, and they'll do like 7 cuts by year end, and that didn't happen. And then if you look at particularly fintech companies and maybe broader financial services companies, then they keep delivering. They find growth, right? I mean, I think the earnings were primarily great, right? They are finding levers for growth. They are delivering new things, expanding geographically. But what happened is that yields stayed higher, right? I mean, and kind of the past is being moved all the way, right? We probably now we are talking about late autumn for the first cut. Nobody's talking about 7 cuts anymore, and maybe the cuts will never happen. And still, as growth companies, they are very sensitive to the rate. So naturally,
Yes.
it's so far it's not an amazing year for fintech companies. There are some standouts like Nubank and Hood, but kind of the rates are putting a pressure on them. Even if it's not directly in the model, kind of having longer rates for longer means that you have to deliver higher growth rates, right? So this has kind of been the first 2 quarters of this year, right? I mean, the pause for the rate cuts has been moving further and further and
It's
further.
really these macroeconomic factors that underpin the surprises.
Exactly, right? It's a market, and of course there is Nvidia, and lots of money moved into Nvidia, into AI, and keeps moving. So of course they leave companies that are not. So kind of in the retrospective, there was nothing surprising about what happened. But of course, there was more optimism coming into this year,
Yeah. Jevgenis, I know that you are thinking or planning to launch a fintech index. You've started speaking about it publicly. Why is that? What is missing, or what you don't like? Basically, what is missing from the existing indices? We have an old, if you want, more traditional one from KBW, and then we have a younger one, the F prime index.
No, it's a good question, right? I think it's again a curiosity, but I try to be objective when I started. So it brings us back to where we started this discussion. What is a fintech company nowadays, right? I mean, why are we including Block and PayPal, and we do not include Fiserv and global payments? Why do kind of Visa and MasterCard, are they fintech companies? I mean, to me, they certainly are, right? They are not lenders, they're not banks.
Is JP Morgan
JP Morgan, right? So how do you treat that, right? So we'll just say like banks and non-banks, maybe that would be
Amex, American Express.
Amex, exactly. Amex makes only 20% from lending. The rest comes from the network fees, right? So to me, they are as fintech as it gets, right? So probably we should do kind of a split between maybe lenders and non-lenders, right? Because these are different risks and kind of probably different levers for growth. But I think kind of the line, whether it's a fintech or non-fintech, is really blurred, and some of the companies that used to be kind of small and fast moving became like really big players.
We can't call them startups anymore.
Exactly, but cannot call them startups, right? I mean, saying that, before 2005 or before millennium, I don't know how to draw the line. Right. So this kind of what got me started with thinking about the index, because I think kind of a movement in Visa and MasterCard should actually explain a lot in what happens with the payment companies, right? Kind of from my background, I learned that, if you're a big player in the market, then a large part of your growth comes just from the market growing, right? So I think PayPal would just kind of doing what they're doing, they would still grow as a commerce market grows, right? Probably around that, right? And until somebody starts hurting them badly. So kind of this was kind of the beginning, right? And if you look at F Prime, it's very geared to this kind of more modernish, more kind of classical fintech companies, right? I started experimenting more. What if I bring the biggest players rather than kind of the shiniest fintech companies, right? What if we add Visa, Mastercard, Amex into the loop? What if we bring Fiserv, FIS, Global Payments in there? And then second part, kind of I think the ambition is to build something super simple, right? Like if you look at the broader market, right? Dow Jones has like 30 stocks, right?
Right.
Which kind of seem to be like industrials and seem to be like, oh, they're not relevant, we live in the technology world. But actually Dow explains a lot. Down shows the direction, right? Yes, you can use like a more complex S&P 500, you can use Nasdaq Composite, give you more precise measures of depending on what you're looking for. But Dow explains a lot, and that just 30 stocks, it's just price. You literally can go buy 30 individual stocks and you have the index. And this is what I'm kind of trying to go after, right? I mean, ideally, we would probably have like 10 companies that would explain maybe 80% of the movement
of the market. Yeah.
Exactly.
And in your book, in your thinking, where does blockchain for finance, and I deliberately use that term versus crypto, belong in fintech, because it definitely belongs there.
No, absolutely right. I mean, as someone who worked with cross-border payments, I'm a big believer in application of blockchain. In moving payments and moving liquidity. I think it's here to stay, right? It's just, at least in my view of the world, blockchain will be part. I think the jury is still out there if it'll be private or public chains, right? After all, the same JP Morgan is already moving something like $1 billion a day over their own private blockchain permission one. Kind of, as an optimist, I want to believe that it will be one of the public chains rather than a private one. I think the jury is still out there. What will be the mechanism for this movement, right? Is it really the stable coins? Kind of remind central banks in a sense, right? Or this will be one of the native currencies, like either Bitcoin or Ethereum. I think that we're yet to see, but I think in one shape or form we'll have blockchain as part of the financial services ecosystem, right? And that's not because I kind of don't believe in Visa or Mastercard or Swift, but I think blockchain brings kind of a fantastic combination of sort of a messaging and the settlement layer in one.
Yeah.
Right. So kind of Swift is fast, right? It will get your message across the globe in seconds, but the money kind of takes some time to move, and that's what blockchain brings, right?
Yeah, it's clearly not the right infrastructure for the world that we live in. It's okay for messaging, but actually, let's not forget that blockchain technology allows us to send the asset.
Exactly. It's the settlement. Exactly.
So there's no exactly settlement risk in the system. And I have my eye on what BlackRock has done with this on-chain issuance of a money market fund, the BIDL token, which is not an existing one that it has been tokenized, but issuing it directly. And it's not perfect because we don't have US treasuries that are natively issued on the blockchain, but if we go there, and we will go there, I think it's inevitable. And, I think that we should be watching both what the NASDAQ, because NASDAQ is not just an exchange, they sell software. A lot
Oh, yeah.
you,
That's a good example, right? Where
yeah, you know better than I do, what their business is. And then if you look at DTCC, they're also, I mean, they did one acquisition recently, and they hadn't done that any for 10 years, and it's in the blockchain space because it's coming. As you said, we don't know how fast, how soon, whether it's private or not, but that's the direction. It's really about innovation at the infrastructure level.
Yeah. Absolutely right. I mean, the world is global, assets move across the board, and somehow, because it's previously would be operated by some kind of either by central banks or by sort of local authorities, we have this issue of moving assets across the borders, right? And I think blockchain kind of solves for that. So to me, kind of, I'm very optimistic, and I'm keep reading and learning about that because
So if we were to close on a statement whether, fintech is done in terms of an investable asset class, because we've had at least a good decade, right, of publicly trading, publicly listed fintechs across the globe, not only in the US. Do you think that the juice is all gone in public markets? Do you think that we might have another major phase of, digital transformation that gives birth to another opportunity in digital financial services, if we don't want to call it fintech?
I mean, as you might have guessed, I'm an optimist, right? So I definitely see that, there's still a lot of innovation left. And the thinking is simple. If you look at kind of younger fintech companies, I mean, the same Block or if you take Coinbase, right? I mean, they have a lot of resources. Look at Robinhood. I mean, Coinbase, they have like what, 5-6 billion in cash just sitting there, and so they have a ton of resources and they have a ton of engineering power, and they will keep relentlessly looking for growth. If kind of Fiserv can afford to hold and invest today and say, hey, we'll grow 5-6% a year and we'll be fine with that. And if Coinbase or Robinhood comes and says, that's our ambition for the next 3 years, it will not sit well. So I think they have the capacity, they have the financial resources, they have the time, so they will keep innovating, right? And they will try to kind of unbundle more services, kind of experiment with them,
and then
we'll keep rebundled, and maybe they'll realize that this was a dead end, we cannot do better than JP Morgan did. But that's fine, right? I mean, this is part of the process, right? But I just don't see what exactly would stop them from that. Like they didn't kind of went bankrupt in 22, and if they kind of survived the kind of probably the most nuclear time there was in fintech, right? I mean, so I think lots of exciting things are yet to come, right?
That's a great point, that we must give that, if you want, we must credit the fintech sector for having survived a major downturn, because we were always discussing that a lot of these companies haven't gone through tough times, macroeconomic and broader, many challenges geopolitically and many uncertainties. The biggest impediment, right, for businesses overall. So, Jevgenijs, before we close, a personal question. What are you excited about in your personal life? Are you reading books? Are you watching movies? Are you a sports fan? The UEFA is going on right now. What excites you beyond fintech?
I'm a father of 3 daughters, right? Three amazing girls. So one is 18, but 2 are really young. One is 3 years old, and one is under 1 year. So I'm really excited, to spend time with them and kind of see them grow and help them
Fatherhood.
become
Fatherhood.
good people. Yeah, fatherhood. It's amazing. Nothing compares to being a father.
To being a father, yes, and offering your love and wisdom and experience to the next generation. So is this
exactly,
and how do you manage to have your day work and to do this, the popular fintech and the 3 girls?
Don't ask.
That's
It's really
the
difficult.
secret, right?
That's the secret, exactly.
Okay, so how shall we close on a public fintech note? What would be your last words?
I think it's an amazing space. I mean, it's exciting businesses, and I'm not talking only about like fintech. I'm also talking about big banks. They're super complex. You know, you can study them probably forever, and every day you also learn something new, right? So if anyone just as curious as I am, then you know, fintech or financial services broadly is an amazing industry to work in or to research.
Yeah. I always like to say that no matter what happens, where and how financial services are delivered with be it branches, be it apps, be it DeFi or whatever, what will not change is that financial services will be core to any economic activity, right? And because it's behind the scenes, many people don't understand the complexity and the magic that has to happen behind the scenes, and whether it's patching because it's all technology, or whether it's being brave and integrating new technologies to move and innovate and advance. It's really a wonderful, mysterious world and very diverse, right? You have consumer banking, you have capital markets, you have, I mean, the whole range and globally so different.
Exactly. I mean, we've all seen what happened, you know, when the banks stopped lending in 2008, you know, the world almost collapsed. I think this is just the best example of how important this industry is to the world economy. So I think it's here to stay for sure.
Here to stay for sure. Yes. Thank you very much, Jevgenijs, for being with us.
Thanks a lot, Edgar.